Shalom. I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you to this week's Focus Israel Report.
In this week's report, we're going to be sharing with you regarding the current status of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process and the background of the life of former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, who died on January 11th. First, the peace process. The Israeli Housing Ministry announced approval for 1,400 new housing units in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The United States, the European Union, and the Palestinians warned Israel that its announcement was harmful to the peace process. U.S. State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki said, "It is never helpful to have steps taken that are not conducive to our efforts in moving forward on peace. We've called on both sides, as you know, many times to create a positive atmosphere for negotiations. So anything that doesn't do that is unhelpful. We consider now and have always considered the settlements to be illegitimate, and we express that, of course, on a regular basis as needed," Psaki said. "But the reality is both sides remain committed to discussing the framework, committed to moving forward, and will keep working with them," she said. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton responded to the announcement saying that the settlements are illegal under international law, and they constitute an obstacle to peace and threaten to make the two-state solution impossible. Furthermore, Britain, France, Spain, and Italy summoned the Israeli ambassadors from these countries to protest plans for the new settlement construction. Meanwhile, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that claiming that settlements were an obstacle to peace was bogus. The real issue is not the settlement, it's not the Palestinian state. The real issue was, and has always been, the recognition of Israel as a Jewish state. The real problem is the persistent refusal to accept a nation-state of the Jewish people by our adversaries, who we would like to be our peace partners. In his comments, Netanyahu took specific aim at the European Union, which has been outspoken in its criticism of settlement construction. Netanyahu questioned why the European Union protested the construction of a few houses, but did not summon Palestinian diplomats over Palestinian misdeeds. When did the European Union call in the Palestinian ambassadors to complain about the incitement that calls for Israel's destruction? He said, "I think it is time to stop the hypocrisy. I think it is time to inject some balance and fairness to this discussion. Because I think this imbalance and this bias against Israel doesn't advance peace," he added. "I think it pushed peace farther away because it tells the Palestinians basically that you can do anything that you want, say anything you want, and you won't be held accountable." After Netanyahu accused the European Union of hypocrisy in condemning settlement construction, Israel Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman summoned the ambassadors of Britain, France, Spain, and Italy and rebuked them for their one-sided position that they constantly take against Israel in favor of the Palestinians. "This position is unacceptable and creates a feeling that they are only looking to place blame on Israel," Lieberman said. In addition, Lieberman insisted that the constant criticisms that the Israeli representatives in Europe receive may have the opposite effect. Israel is making great effort to allow the dialogue with the Palestinians to continue, and the position these states are taking, beyond it being biased and unbalanced, is significantly harming the chances of reaching a peace agreement, the foreign minister said. In any event, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry plans to present a framework deal between Israel and the Palestinians at the end of January at a conference in the Jordanian city of Aqaba, hosted by Jordan's King Abdullah II. Jordan will have a hand in finalizing the terms of an agreement that control over the border and natural resources will effectively remain in Israel's hands. Palestinian sources say that it will only include a general outline with vague and flexible demands which will allow both Palestinians and Israelis to interpret the outline as they see fit. It will include a statement supporting Palestinian aspirations for Jerusalem as their capital. Israel Deputy Defense Minister Danny Danon said that Kerry would return to the Middle East in the coming week to promote a meeting between Netanyahu and Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas under Jordanian sponsorship. Danon said that if Netanyahu agrees to withdraw to the 1967 lines or makes any concessions regarding Jerusalem, that it would be opposed by members of Netanyahu's own Likud political party. Israel Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon expressed great skepticism of a possible peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, especially the U.S. security plan for the Jordan Valley. He expressed these views in private conversations between Israel and the United States. In particular, Ya'alon had harsh words to say about Secretary of State John Kerry. The American security plan presented to us is not worth the paper it's written on, Ya'alon said. It contains no peace and no security. Only our continued presence in the West Bank, Judea, and the Jordan River will endure our protection against rockets from every direction. Ya'alon said that Kerry is acting out of misplaced obsession and messianic fervor. Kerry cannot teach me anything about the conflict with the Palestinians. Ya'alon, who sits beside Netanyahu during his talks with Kerry, has, during the months of negotiations, become a bitter and tough enemy of the American team. I'm a tough nut to crack, he said. There are no actual negotiations going on with the Palestinians. The United States is holding negotiations with Israel and in parallel with the Palestinians. So far, we are the only side to have given anything, and that is the release of murderers, and the Palestinians have given nothing. Meanwhile, a senior Palestinian official accused U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry of succumbing to Israeli demands to advance two central issues in the peace talks, that is, recognition of Israel as a Jewish state and a continued Israeli security presence in the Jordan Valley. Israel has succeeded in really persuading Mr. Kerry to change the agenda of the discussions, Fatah's Central Committee member Nabil Sha'ath said. Today you will see Mr. Kerry going back and forth, discussing nothing but these two issues. The two issues have never been on the Palestinian agenda. That is, the Jewishness of the State of Israel and the Jordan Valley. These two sticking points, Sha'ath maintained, will never be agreed upon by the Palestinians and are likely to result in the dissolution of talks. You think any Palestinian leader in his right mind can ever accept this? Sha'ath remarked regarding the Jewish status of Israel. Or is this simply instated to make it impossible for any Palestinian leader to sign a peace agreement with Israel? Instead, the Palestinians have decided to launch a global diplomatic and legal assault on Israel. The Palestinian Authority is currently setting up teams to wage diplomatic war against Israel in every conceivable forum, including pushing for boycotts of Israel and seeking legal rulings against Israel through international courts in The Hague, according to Israel's Channel 2 television station. Unless Kerry significantly changes the current formulation of his framework proposals, the Palestinians will reject his overtures, confident that much of the international community will consider them to be the injured party and hold Israel responsible for the failure of the peace efforts. The Palestinians are furious that Kerry is offering them a state with no borders, no capital, and no control over border crossings, and without Jerusalem. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said that there will be no peace without a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem, and that he would not recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Without East Jerusalem as a capital of the state of Palestine, there will be no peace between us and Israel, Abbas said. Abbas also reiterated that he will not recognize Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people. We will not recognize it. We will not accept it, and it's our right not to recognize the Jewish state. Let them say whatever they want to say. Unless it is mentioned clearly and marked in big font that East Jerusalem is the capital of a Palestinian state, there will be no peace with Israel, and I want everyone to know this, said Abbas. In addition, Arab foreign ministers have notified U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry that they will not accept Israel as a Jewish state nor compromise on Palestinian sovereignty in Jerusalem. Palestinian Authority Foreign Minister Riyad al-Malki said that 9 Arab foreign ministers comprising the follow-up committee for the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative have agreed during a recent meeting in Paris, France, to present to Kerry a unified Arab position on core Palestinian demands. A clear and unified Arab and Palestinian position was presented to Kerry, rejecting the recognition of Israel as a Jewish state, Malki said. The American Secretary heard this position from me and from other Arab foreign ministers, who also consider East Jerusalem to be the capital of a Palestinian state. Al-Malki also said that Kerry still had hard work with the Israeli side in order to reach agreements that will satisfy the needs of the Palestinians. He further noted that there is still no progress in the ongoing peace talks and that large gaps remain between the parties. According to Malki, Kerry told the Arab ministers that if negotiations failed, he would not hesitate to publicly name the side which provided concessions and cooperated with his efforts, and the side which refused to cooperate. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas sent a defiant message to Israel's leadership and U.S. mediators recently, telling cheering supporters that the Palestinians won't kneel and won't drop demands for East Jerusalem being the capital of a future Palestinian state. Regarding the issue of Palestinian refugees, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said that he would not negotiate away the absolute right of Palestinian refugees and their descendants to return to sovereign Israel. Finally, Abbas suggested that he would not continue negotiations beyond a U.S. set target date of the end of April, and instead will resume his quest for broader international recognition of a state of Palestine by the United Nations and its various agencies. Next, Israel Finance Minister Yair Lapid said that his political party, Yesh Atid, which means there's a future, would leave the current government coalition if negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians do not progress and result in a peace agreement. I remain part of this government so that we can advance the peace process, Lapid said. I have no reason to remain part of a government that will not advance negotiations with the Palestinians. In other news, Israel's 11th Prime Minister Ariel Sharon suffered a stroke on January 4, 2006 and was left in a permanent vegetative state until his death 8 years later on January 11th. Could Sharon's death be a sign of the coming of the Messiah? A few months before he died at the age of 108, one of Israel's most prominent rabbis, Rabbi Kaduri, said that he wrote the name of the Messiah on a small note which he requested would remain sealed until 1 year after his death. When the note was unsealed, it revealed what many have known for centuries, that Yeshua, or Jesus, is the Messiah. The note described the Messiah using 6 words in Hebrew, hinting that the initial letters form the name of the Messiah. His secret note said, concerning the letter abbreviation of the Messiah's name, his note said in Hebrew, translated into English, he will lift the people and prove that his word and Torah are valid. Signed, Rabbi Yitzhak Kaduri. In Hebrew, the initial letters of this phrase spells Yehoshua, or the Hebrew name for Jesus. In Hebrew, Yehoshua or Yeshua means salvation. A few months before Rabbi Kaduri died, at the age of 108, he surprised his followers when he told them that he met the Messiah. Kaduri gave a message in his synagogue on Yom Kippur, that is, the Day of Atonement, teaching how to recognize the Messiah. He also mentioned that the Messiah would appear to Israel after Ariel Sharon's death. At that time, Sharon was still prime minister and had not yet suffered his stroke. So now, 8 years after suffering his stroke, Sharon is now dead. So how long might we wait until we see Rabbi Kaduri's prophecy come true? How long will we have to wait now, since Ariel Sharon has died, till we see the coming of the Messiah? Of course, only time will tell, but we will continue to be watchmen on the walls of Jerusalem. Well, that's going to conclude this week's report where we shared with you the current status of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process and the life and background of Israel's 11th Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, who recently died on January the 11th.
Until we do it again, Shalom in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.